Ladies and gentlemen, have you ever walked away from someone and felt the weight of 1,000 questions, wondering if it was the right choice, fearing their reaction, doubting yourself? Tonight, I want to take you on a journey into a truth few dare to speak aloud. The stages of regret a narcissist experiences when you finally choose yourself. This isn't about revenge or validation. It's about power, clarity, and freedom. Stay with me, because by the end of this story, you'll see why walking away isn't loss. It's the most courageous act of your life. Walking away is often misunderstood. From the outside, it can look like abandonment, coldness, or giving up too easily. But the truth is far deeper and far braver than that. Walking away is not about leaving someone behind. It is about finally choosing not to leave yourself behind anymore. It is the moment when survival turns into self-respect, when endurance gives way to dignity. For a long time, staying felt like strength. You stayed through confusion, emotional exhaustion, broken promises, and self-doubt. You told yourself love required patience, sacrifice, and understanding. And maybe it did, until the cost became your voice, your peace, and your sense of self. Walking away happens when the body and soul quietly agree that continuing would mean self-betrayal. That decision is not impulsive. It is born from countless moments of trying, hoping, and enduring. Walking away requires courage because it goes against our deepest conditioning. We are taught to fix things, to hold on, to prove our worth through loyalty. Leaving feels like failure because we are taught to equate endurance with virtue. But true courage is not staying in places that harm you. True courage is recognizing when love has become a battlefield and choosing to step out, even when your heart still aches. It takes bravery to walk into uncertainty without guarantees. There is no applause when you choose yourself, no instant relief. Often there is grief, loneliness, and fear. But there is also something powerful taking root: self-trust. Walking away says, I matter enough to protect my well-being. It is an act of self-rescue, not rejection. When you walk away, you are not abandoning someone else. You are ending the abandonment of yourself. And that choice, though painful, becomes the foundation for healing, clarity, and a life that no longer requires you to disappear in order to belong. And once you have chosen yourself, once you have stepped out of survival mode and into self-respect, something else quietly unfolds, something the narcissist never prepared for. Because while you were learning how to breathe again, they were beginning to feel something unfamiliar: loss of control. A narcissist's regret is rarely born from the absence of love. It is born from the absence of power. What they mourn is not the warmth of your presence, but the certainty of your availability. You were the constant, the reassurance, the mirror, the emotional anchor that made them feel important, admired, untouchable. When you walked away, that supply vanished. And with it went the illusion that they were always in charge. This is why their pain looks different. It isn't quiet reflection or tender longing. It is confusion, irritation, ego-bruising disbelief. They ask not, how did I hurt them, but how could they leave me? The wound strikes the identity they carefully constructed, the belief that they are indispensable, irreplaceable, immune to consequences. Your departure punctures that belief in a way no argument ever could. They may replay moments, not searching for understanding, but for leverage. Where did they lose their grip? What move did they miscalculate? Regret for them is strategic before it is emotional. It revolves around control slipping through their fingers, not compassion awakening in their heart. And here is the quiet power in that truth: your healing is not dependent on their realization. The moment you stopped explaining yourself, stopped begging to be seen, stopped negotiating your worth, you reclaimed something priceless: autonomy. When control disappears, reality steps in, and reality is merciless to illusion. Your absence becomes the message. It says what words never could: you no longer consent to being managed, minimized, or manipulated. And in that space where their power once lived, your freedom begins to grow. And when control is gone, when manipulation no longer works and your freedom becomes undeniable, something unexpected takes its place: silence. Not the kind that feels empty to you, but the kind that feels unbearable to them, because silence becomes a mirror. And for someone who has spent a lifetime avoiding reflection, that mirror is merciless. Your absence removes the noise they relied on, the reactions, the explanations, the emotional labor you once offered so freely. Without it, there is nowhere to redirect discomfort, no one to blame in real time, no one to absorb the emotional overflow. And in that quiet, they are left face to face with themselves. Not the grand image they project, but the cracks they work so hard to conceal. This is where the unraveling begins. Not dramatically, not all at once, but internally. The silence forces moments of awareness they cannot escape. Late nights stretch longer. Victories feel strangely flat. Conversations lack depth. And slowly, an unsettling realization creeps in. The problem did not disappear when you left. It simply lost its distraction. Silence doesn't accuse, it doesn't argue, it doesn't demand accountability. And that is precisely why it is so powerful. It reflects, it echoes, it amplifies. Every unresolved insecurity, every buried fear, every fragile belief about their own importance grows louder in the absence of your presence. Meanwhile, on the other side of that silence, you are learning something profound. You are learning that peace does not require explanation, that you do not owe closure to someone who refused to listen, that your quiet is not avoidance, it is self-protection. They may interpret your silence as cruelty or punishment, but in truth, it is the natural consequence of your growth. You are no longer performing emotional labor for someone who never intended to meet you halfway. And as the silence deepens, it does something irreversible. It separates illusion from reality. Because once the noise is gone, the truth has room to speak. And for the first time, they're forced to hear it, even if they don't yet understand what it's saying. And as that truth begins to speak in the quiet, something inside them fractures. Not the heart, not yet, but the image they've spent years protecting. Because before a narcissist ever feels emotional pain, their ego must break first. The ego is the armor, the stage, the story they tell themselves to survive. And silence has a way of cracking armor without ever touching it. They start to feel it in subtle ways, a defensiveness that rises too quickly, a need to prove themselves to people who never mattered before, an irritation when admiration doesn't land the way it used to. What's breaking isn't love, it's the illusion of invincibility. Your absence has stripped them of the role they were playing, and without an audience who truly believed in it, the performance falters. This is the stage where confusion turns inward. They may still blame you, still justify their behavior, but beneath that narrative, something shifts. Doubt, a question they've avoided their whole life, begins to surface. What if I'm not who I thought I was? That question is terrifying, because the ego was never designed to withstand honesty, only control. And this is why their reactions become erratic. One moment they appear superior and unaffected. The next they are defensive, bitter, or strangely hollow. The ego is scrambling to rebuild itself, to reassert dominance before the deeper emotional truth can emerge. Because once the heart feels, accountability follows, and accountability has never been safe territory for them. While this internal fracture unfolds, you are standing in a very different space. You are no longer seeking validation from someone else's perception of you. The pieces of yourself that were once bent to accommodate their ego are realigning. You are learning that your worth does not require an audience, and your peace does not need permission. Their ego breaks because it was never built on truth. Yours rebuilds because it finally is. And in that contrast lies the turning point, the moment where their unraveling accelerates and your healing becomes undeniable. And once the ego has cracked and the performance can no longer hold, the final stage arrives quietly, not with apologies, not with transformation, but with an emptiness they don't know how to escape. This is where regret finally settles in, not as remorse, but as a haunting awareness that something essential is gone and cannot be recreated. They look around and realize the connections feel shallow now. Conversations skim the surface. Admiration fades quickly. No one reflects them with the depth you once did. And in that realization, a painful truth begins to take shape. They didn't just lose a person, they lost a presence that made their world feel more real. The regret isn't loud or dramatic, it's the W, knowing that what they had with you was rare, and they didn't know how to protect it. This regret lingers because it comes too late. Growth would have required humility, and humility never felt safe to them. So instead of evolving, they circle the loss, replaying memories not to understand, but to soothe the emptiness. They may reach out, test the waters, search for familiar energy. But what they are really searching for is a version of themselves that existed when you were still there. Meanwhile, something extraordinary is happening in your life. You are no longer defined by what you endured. The clarity you gained has replaced the chaos you once normalized. You are learning that closure doesn't come from hearing the right words from the wrong person. It comes from finally trusting your own experience. Their regret becomes a silent companion they carry forward. Your freedom becomes a foundation you build upon. And in the end, the most powerful shift of all takes place. You no longer need them to understand what they lost. You understand what you found yourself. And as you stand firmly in what you found yourself, an unexpected ripple moves outward. Your healing doesn't stay quiet. It doesn't announce itself, but it is felt. And this is where the story takes a turn they never anticipated, because your growth becomes the very thing that accelerates their unraveling. Nothing unsettles a narcissist more than seeing the person they once diminished rise with at them. Your peace exposes what chaos once hid. Your boundaries highlight the absence of theirs. Your confidence, rebuilt from honesty and self-respect, reflects back everything they avoided becoming. You are no longer reacting, explaining, or defending. And that lack of access is deeply destabilizing. They may hear about you thriving, smiling differently, living more fully, and instead of pride or happiness, it stirs something darker, a mix of envy, confusion, and disbelief. Because the narrative they told themselves depended on you being broken without them. Your healing dismantles that story completely. What they feel isn't admiration, it's exposure. Your evolution reminds them that change was possible all along, and they chose not to take it. Every step you take forward quietly asks a question they can't answer: why couldn't I grow too? And that question deepens the emptiness regret already planted. Meanwhile, you are no longer measuring your progress by their reaction. You understand now that healing is not loud, it is consistent. It is waking up without dread. It is trusting your instincts again. It is choosing yourself without guilt. And with every grounded choice you make, the imbalance between you grows wider. You didn't heal to make them feel anything. But your healing becomes undeniable proof that the problem was never your worth, it was the dynamic. And as you rise, their illusion collapses further because growth has a way of revealing exactly where Psalm E1 chose to remain stuck. And as that distance widens, as your healing continues without permission or apology, something fundamental shifts in the balance of power. Not through confrontation, not through revenge, but through your refusal to explain yourself anymore. This is the moment the dynamic truly breaks. For so long, you were the one translating your pain into language they could dismiss. You justified your feelings, softened your boundaries, over-explained your needs, hoping clarity would lead to care. But clarity never created safety. It only gave them more information to manipulate. When you stop explaining, you remove their access to your inner world, and without access, control collapses. They feel it immediately. The questions they once asked to probe, not understand, no longer get answers. The emotional hooks they used to pull you back don't land. Your calm is unfamiliar. Your detachment feels like rejection, not because you are cruel, but because you are no longer available to be managed. This is where power truly shifts, not when they regret, not when they reach out, but when you realize you don't need to convince anyone of your reality. You stop trying to be believed and start standing in what you know. That certainty changes how you speak, how you move, how you respond, or don't respond at all. They may interpret your silence as arrogance or indifference, but what it really is sovereignty. You have reclaimed authorship of your story. You are no longer asking for understanding from someone invested in misunderstanding you, and in that stillness, something remarkable happens. The chaos you once carried begins to dissipate. Your nervous system settles. Your intuition sharpens. You begin to recognize how much energy was spent trying to be heard in a place that benefited from keeping you confused. The power didn't shift because they lost interest. It shifted because you stopped participating in a dynamic that required your self-doubt to survive. And once that happens, there is no going back. Only forward, grounded, and free. And as you move forward, grounded in that freedom, another truth becomes impossible to ignore, the one that finally breaks the illusion you once carried. What they miss was never the depth of who you are, it was the role you played in sustaining them. They don't ache for your soul, your complexity, your truth. They ache for the supply, the attention, validation, patience, and emotional labor that once flowed so effortlessly from you. This realization is not bitter, it is liberating because it explains why being fully yourself never felt safe with them. Your needs disrupted the transaction, your boundaries interfered with the exchange. The more human you became, the more distant they grew. And now, in your absence, what they feel is not heartbreak, it is withdrawal. They search for replacements, but nothing satisfies in the same way, not because you were perfect, but because you were authentic. And authenticity cannot be replicated when someone is only looking to consume. They may mimic connection, move quickly, charm easily, but the emptiness persists. What they lost was not love, it was access. Understanding this changes how you see the past. You stop romanticizing the struggle. You stop questioning whether you were too much or not enough. You recognize that your empathy was not met with reciprocity because reciprocity was never the goal. Supply was. And in this clarity, your self blame dissolves. You realize that the exhaustion you carried was not a flaw, it was evidence of imbalance. You were pouring into something that could not pour back. And once you stop being the source, the system collapses. This truth gives you something priceless, emotional freedom. You no longer wait for them to miss you in the way you missed them. You no longer measure your value by their inability to love deeply. You understand now they miss what you gave, not who you are. And that understanding releases you from the need to ever return. And once you see the truth clearly, that they miss what you gave, not who you are, something inside you finally settles. The endless waiting for an apology, an explanation, a moment of recognition begins to fade because you realize that closure was never something they could hand you. Closure was never locked inside their understanding. It was always waiting inside your clarity. For a long time, you believed peace would come when they admit. Ted what they did, when they named the hurt, when they took responsibility. But that hope kept you tethered to their limitations. You were asking someone who avoided accountability to suddenly offer it as a gift. And the longer you waited, the longer you postponed your own healing. Clarity changes that. Clarity doesn't rewrite the past, it contextualizes it. It allows you to see patterns instead of isolated incidents, dynamics instead of excuses. You stop asking, why wasn't I enough? And start recognizing, this was never built to hold me. That understanding brings a quiet kind of closure, the kind that doesn't need agreement to be valid. You no longer need them to validate your pain because you trust it now. You no longer replay conversations hoping for a different outcome. You accept what was without minimizing what it cost you. And in that acceptance, the emotional knots begin to loosen. Closure through clarity means you stop chasing resolution from the very source of the confusion. You reclaim your energy. You redirect your focus. You stop reopening wounds just to prove they exist. The truth stands without argument. And as you step into this final phase of understanding, you feel lighter, not because the experience didn't matter, but because it no longer defines you. Their silence, their denial, their lack of apology no longer hold power. You have named your reality, and that naming becomes the ending you were waiting for. Strong, self-honoring, and complete. A Once you have claimed that clarity, once you no longer need their validation or apology, the most profound transformation takes root. Your freedom. This is the culmination of every step you've taken, every boundary you've drawn, every ounce of courage you've mustered to walk away. Freedom is not just the absence of them, it is the presence of yourself fully and unapologetically. For so long, your energy, your emotions, and even your identity were borrowed by someone who never intended to return them whole. You adapted, you softened, you diminished, not because it was wrong to love, but because the love was conditional, transactional, and never truly reciprocal. And now, in this space where their influence no longer reaches, you are reclaiming what was always yours, your voice, your joy, your power. Freedom feels different from relief. Relief is temporary, fleeting, a pause from the chaos. Freedom is enduring. It is waking up without tension in your chest. It is making decisions without second guessing yourself. It is knowing that your worth does not hinge on anyone else's perception, their moods, or their approval. Every step away from them reinforces this truth. You are whole, independent, and unshakable. And the beauty of this freedom is that it is active, not passive. You are no longer defined by what was taken from you, but by what you choose to create. Your time, your love, your energy, these belong solely to you now. You are free to grow, to dream, to connect, authentically without compromise. In that freedom lies your ultimate lesson and gift. You are not here to fix anyone, to wait for anyone, or to shrink yourself for anyone. You are here to live fully, courageously, and truthfully. And in that living, you show the world and yourself that leaving was never loss. It was liberation. So here's the truth I want you to carry with you long after this moment. Every stage of regret a narcissist goes through after you walk away is not about you failing or them realizing what they lost. It is about the natural consequences of a relationship built on imbalance, control, and one-sided energy. Their regret is loud, messy, and sometimes even dramatic, but it is never yours to fix. What belongs to you is clarity, healing, and above all, freedom. Imagine for a moment what it feels like to step into a life where your worth is no longer negotiable, where your peace is non-negotiable, where your boundaries are respected not because you demand it, but because you honor yourself. That life is waiting on the other side of the decision to stop explaining, stop performing, stop shrinking. It is waiting the moment you choose yourself over the chaos, your soul over their control, your truth over their illusion. And here's the paradox. While they are unraveling, chasing the pieces they once held for granted, you are ascending. Every smile you reclaim, every boundary you hold, every quiet victory in your own life reminds you that their regret is not your burden. It is merely proof that you were never meant to stay a cage built for someone else's comfort. You are meant to walk freely, to shine fully, to create a life that does not require anyone else's permission to exist. So, if you've ever doubted the power of walking away, remember this: leaving is not loss. Leaving is liberation. Leaving is the first act of courage in a life where you are finally the author, the hero, and the witness to your own story. And that story, your story, is unstoppable. Let it unfold. Let it shine. Let them watch because you are already free.